You know what really sucks? Having to wake up in the middle of the night to pee. And back in ancient Rome, that's exactly what everyone had to do. Welcome to my channel. It's me. And today we're off to ancient Rome for some boring history for sleep. If you like this kind of content, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Now let's get started. The year is 42 AD and you are Marcus, a successful merchant who has just made the trip from Athens to Rome to attend the annual census. This census, unlike those in more recent times, was also an opportunity to flatter the emperor, Caligula, and ensure your name wasn't written down in his infamous Black Book, which contained the names of people who annoyed him. This would result in their banishment from Rome. So while you walk through the streets with your gifts for the emperor, you have to step over piles of trash and broken marble and try not to breathe too deeply because the stench of urine and decaying garbage is overpowering. And to top it all off, you have to keep one eye out for beggars, prostitutes, and human excrement. Human excrement? Yeah, that's right. You see, ancient Rome didn't have public toilets or sewage systems. In fact, they didn't even have indoor plumbing. Instead, every household had an on-site bathroom, usually located next to the kitchen, which consisted of a hole in the ground surrounded by 3 walls. So when you needed to use the facilities, you'd head into your backyard, squat down and do your business. Then once you were done, you'd take a small handheld shovel and cover it up. Simple enough, right? Well, not quite. See, there was a slight problem with this method. The land that Rome was built on was very poor quality soil. And when you mix water, human waste and bad soil together, you end up with giant patches of land that are too contaminated to grow anything. Additionally, no one cleaned up after themselves. So if you weren't careful where you squatted, you might end up getting covered in other people's poop. But what about the taverns and restaurants? Surely they had some sort of bathroom situation. Oh, absolutely. Taverns and restaurants had bathrooms, but patrons had to pay extra to use them, and they were usually nothing more than a hole dug into a barrel or the corner of a room. Also, the urine that you sometimes saw on the streets or walls wasn't exactly clean either. You see, the urine was used for cleaning and was often mixed with vinegar or other liquids. Still, though, the patrons would often cover up the bathroom floors with sawdust to help absorb the smells and the stains. But when you really had to go, you knew you had to head home. When nighttime rolled around, everyone would rush to their outhouses to relieve themselves one last time before bed. And fortunately, most people lived in multi-story apartment buildings, and their outhouses weren't exactly easy to access. So instead, they would carry small bladders with them and relieve themselves onto the street. This meant that at night, walking around the city was an absolute minefield for the unsuspecting. People would stumble home from the tavern, drunk, only to step in something they shouldn't have. The urine and feces were so prevalent at night that even animals avoided the streets. So how did the wealthy deal with this issue? Well, they had servants who would relieve themselves in the street for them. But sometimes this meant that these servants would come home with something else on their hands. Prostitutes were another huge problem in ancient Rome. There were tens of thousands of them, and they openly solicited business, especially outside taverns and brothels. Prostitution was considered a respectable job, and many women supported themselves and their families with their earnings. However, they were heavily taxed, and so they were forced to work wherever they could find customers. These women were always trying to stay one step ahead of the police, who regularly raided brothels and arrested anyone who wasn't a Roman citizen. So these women would often frequent taverns, where there was always a steady stream of new faces. In fact, prostitution was so common that pimps even set up shop inside taverns, and the tavern owners turned a blind eye to their activities. Prostitutes would earn anywhere from 1 to 6 denarii per night, and most spent 5 or 6 nights a week working, meaning that they earned a pretty decent living. However, the taverns were dangerous places for women, both prostitutes and non-prostitutes alike, because they were often harassed by male patrons. And if the tavern owner didn't intervene on the prostitute's behalf, she could be beaten or even killed. Because of this, prostitutes preferred to work on the streets where they could avoid the crowds and the tavern owners. They also had much more control over their pricing and could make double or triple what they could in a tavern. Of course, being a prostitute in ancient Rome wasn't all fun games. Not only were they looked down upon by society, but they were also seen as a threat by the women whose husbands they were stealing time away from. These jealous wives would sometimes hire thugs to beat or even kill prostitutes. To defend themselves against these attacks, prostitutes would sometimes hire bodyguards, often veterans who had lost a limb in battle and were looking for steady work. And although the police rarely intervened when fights broke out between women, they took the attacks on prostitutes very seriously. If a woman was killed or even injured, the police would immediately throw the perpetrator in prison. The third big problem plaguing Rome were beggars. Now, begging wasn't illegal in Rome, but it was frowned upon and beggars were generally looked down on. Most beggars were former soldiers who had been wounded in battle or had been left paralyzed after being flogged. Even though Emperor Augustus had outlawed torture, many soldiers still suffered from the lingering effects of beatings they received years prior. Unlike in Greece, there was little to no government aid for these men, so they were forced to beg for food and money. And the worst part was that these men weren't even allowed to ask for money directly. The law prohibited begging, and if caught, they could be put to death. Instead, they had to rely on the kindness of strangers or the charity of priests. Many beggars would hang around temples where food and drink were offered to the gods. They would then wait for the worshippers to leave so they could steal the offerings and eat them themselves. Others would simply stand in the streets and hold out their hand until someone gave them something. If you were a beggar and you wanted to ensure a meal, you just had to head to the Appian Way and wait for a funeral procession to pass by. During funerals, it was customary for family members to toss gold coins on top of the coffin and then break off pieces of bread and toss them to the mourners. And if you were quick, you could snag some free food and maybe even a few shiny coins. Still, despite all the problems Rome had to endure, it was the center of the civilized world. Visiting Rome was like going to Disneyland, except instead of Mickey Mouse, everyone worshipped the emperor. If you could afford the trip, your life was probably pretty sweet. Just don't forget to watch your step when you go out at night. Alright, now it's time for bed. Get cozy and try to remember everything you learned today. Remember, you can always come back here for a review session. Just don't forget to subscribe so you're notified when I upload new videos. And if you want even more boring history for sleep, check out the playlist link in the description below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something new today. If you liked the video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. You can also check out my podcast, The History of Rome, available on various platforms. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.